All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started just to be aware of our speaker's time and because I know she has a lot to talk to you about and to cover. So I am introducing a really esteemed scientist today, Dr. Karla Heidelberg. She earned her bachelor's degree from Maryville College as part of the class of 1988, and then she went on to pursue her Ph.D. in Biological Oceanography from the University of Maryland, where she also conducted her postdoc research. Since graduating and completing her postdoc there, she moved on to hold a variety of positions. She was once a scientific advisor for the U.S. Department of State and also served as a global program coordinator for the J. Craig Venter Institute, which is a world leader in genomic research, and you're probably familiar with at least some of their work where they were busy sequencing the entirety of the human genome. Currently, she serves as the director of the USCC grant, as well as a professor of the practice of biology and environmental studies at the University of Southern California. Despite her busy schedule, she still finds time to help out here at give back to Maryville College as a part of the board of directors. And today she's going to be providing you a whole lot of perspective and advice on how to contribute to scientific endeavors at the largest scale possible. And she'll be doing that in her presentation titled Navigating the Seas of Opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you, Brett. And thank you all for inviting me back. So I'm Karla Heidelberg, and I really enjoy coming back because Maryville College is an amazing place, and students that come out of here tend to do amazing things. So when Brett and I were talking about what to do, you guys are all STEM majors, and so I wasn't sure if I should do a science talk. And after a couple exchanges, what I decided to do was kind of a half science talk and half careers talk. Like, what do you do when you leave Maryville College? And how easy it is. So I'm now at the University of Southern California, the other USC, usually USC on this side of the Mississippi, everyone thinks University of South Carolina. We're over in Los Angeles, so I'm a ways from here. I got my start here, and I totally fell in love with the Smoky Mountains here. But I was also from this county. I went to William Blount High School, and I really didn't know much what else was out there on the other side of Tennessee or wherever. I mean, you get entrenched here, and it's really enjoyable, and you don't think what opportunities there might be somewhere else. So the other thing is when you're an undergrad, and sometimes you're talking to your professors, and it's like, oh, what do I do? And they're like, well, you know, after undergrad, you go to grad school. And then you do like a postdoc, and then you get a position in academia. And sometimes when you're on a campus, you forget that you can do other things that are really a lot of fun, and they're not that traditional path. So that traditional path, you start out in high school, you get an undergrad degree, and then you figure it all out, and everyone think, oh, you got an undergrad degree, you know exactly what you're going to do. How many people in this room know what they're going to do when they graduate? Yeah, that's about right. So there's a lot. So this was my path, and I thought I was going to do the traditional path, like go on to grad school, but things kind of changed. And what I'd like to do is share just a little bit about how nothing was predicted, nothing was expected, and nothing was easy. But man, it's been kind of a fun road getting there. So I will tell you, I was a bio major until my junior year, and talk about strange decisions. As a 5-foot-something, maybe on a good day, volleyball player here at Maryville College, I made a decision to change my major because I could not schedule my science labs with volleyball practice. So I changed my major to occupational therapy. And all of a sudden, instead of being an ecology major, which is what I was really interested in, I just switched over to something more like human health. But that was my degree when I got out of here. And I spent time working in hospitals and nursing homes and things like that after I left here. And I quickly realized, while it was an okay field, it didn't inspire me. It didn't make me feel like I could do this for the rest of my life. So while I was doing work, I went back to night school to pick up those classes that I didn't take here, like physics and biochemistry and whatever, that I needed to get back into grad school. And so I ended up being fortunate enough to land at the University of Maryland by complete and total serendipity because my husband was going there. It was like, oh my gosh, we're right here. Chesapeake Bay is here. The ocean is here. A bunch of lakes here. I got to figure this out. And so I went back to night school. I got some prerequisites. I applied. And I got into a Ph.D. program in a field I didn't even know anything about. How many people here have had marine biology? Yeah, so I didn't even know what an estuary was. I didn't know an estuary is where like salt and freshwater mix. I didn't know that. And all of a sudden I'm in a program and I am well behind the curve of everybody else in the program. So that's okay though, because I was motivated to be there. And I chose a program that allowed an interdisciplinary approach to science. So in addition to taking courses for my PhD in my field, I was also taking courses like the economics of coastal ecosystems and, you know, just other things. So I ended up getting into a lab of a person who studied cnidarians, which I started out studying jellyfish and then a ctenophore, like a jellyfish. But I was trying to study in Chesapeake Bay. And when you're diving in Chesapeake Bay, you can't see. You don't even need a buddy because you can't see your buddy anyway. And so I wanted to continue looking at zooplankton, so that's like aquatic insects, contribution to cnidarian food budgets. I couldn't really do it in Chesapeake Bay. And a new advisor came to the University of Maryland that was looking for a grad student who had diving experience. Well, I got my diving experience because I did it when I got married so I could go do a honeymoon in a really cool place. And all of a sudden I was able to use that as a tool to advance my career. So I ended up working on corals. So I switched to corals. And then I ended up being able to use some pretty cool facilities. I've saturated in this habitat 4 different times. It's now defunct as of 2 years ago, but it was located in the Florida Keys. I did a lot of research using some pretty high-tech equipment, and it was an unbelievable experience. I had the best time of my life. I want to say at Maryville College because I had a really good time here, but I really enjoyed grad school. But then, after grad school, I had what's called a two-body problem. I had a husband who was also in science, and he was able to get a job somewhere, so that meant I couldn't just go across the country and grab a job. So I had to stay in the same area. Let me keep going. Oh, so what I did is I now had a PhD, a postdoc, and I decided to go for an internship in the Washington, D.C. area, which is where the University of Maryland was. And I ended up at the State Department. And I went in and I thought, you know, I'll be sitting in the back of the room and they'll say, hey, Heidelberg, go figure out like the story behind this and then educate us so we can do stuff. And I ended up at the State Department. They were short-staffed. It's like, you've had coral reef experience. You're in charge. You're going to be the lead on coral reefs for the State Department. Well, coral reefs, one, I knew a lot about coral reefs. I didn't know a lot about policy. And coral reefs don't respect international boundaries, right? They're there, and any country near them can affect them. And so the State Department had a vested interest in maintaining coastal resources for economic development in the U.S., but through a policy lens. And so all of a sudden I was well in over my head. They also gave me land-based sources of pollution, and I worked also on invasive species. So shipping's a big international thing. Ships take species all over the world. Man, I was drinking from a fire hose here. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was doing it every day. I go in, it's like, all right, I'm here. And that's what I did. And so coral reefs was my big thing. But I got to go to a lot of, I got to go to those negotiations where everyone wears earphones and they're speaking different languages in the earphones and they're negotiating treaties. I didn't necessarily do that yet. That's a pretty advanced thing, but I got to see it, and it changed how I think about things. It changed how I think about science, because now I think about science as not only does it need to be good for science sake, but it also needs to have an application for real world things. after that, so now I'm a biological oceanography with international policy experience, and I got picked up by this crazy guy here named J. Craig Venter, who did the human genome, and he wanted to take his yacht as a tax deduction. So it was my job to turn his boat into a research vessel, and then hire a crew and work with the science and take the boat around the world, taking water every 200 miles, and then sequencing the bejesus out of all the bacteria that we were able to collect. And by doing that, so when we talk about, how many people here are pre-med? Anyone in here are pre-health? So you always think about like, wow, if we could just find the gene that causes this disease, or if we could just find the antimicrobial bacteria or something like that. You're not going to find it in the human genome. You're not going to find it in the dog genome. You're going to find it in the bacteria. So we went around the world sampling every 200 miles, sequencing all the bacteria, and then trying to put it together using computers to kind of reassemble the genomes and look at what kind of bacteria are there, but also what do they have the potential to do. So the gene discovery on this was a huge team. And the gene discovery on this was amazing. From there, I had a real decision. Do I stay in a non-for-profit? Do I go back into the government? Or do I try to get back into academia? And about that time, my husband John and I had a dual offer to go back to, whoops, forget that, go back to academia, and USC hired us as microbial ecologists. So I didn't train to be a microbial ecologist. Somehow life just took me there. And then once I was there, I was like, well, I'm not going to let this opportunity slip. And so I had to work really hard to catch up to those who had trained their entire lives to be microbial ecologists. When we got there, so this is the University of Southern California, located in downtown LA. The Watts riots are right where campus is. It's a really urban, very, inner city area. When we were touring, there's like, oh yeah, well, we have this research lab on Catalina Island, which is off the coast of LA. And we were like, well, okay, we want to come to USC. Could we live on the island? And they're like, sure. So we moved to Catalina Island. This is their research lab. And it's located, here's Los Angeles, here's Catalina. And, our kids ended up in a one-room schoolhouse. They were raised at a marine lab, poor kids. And it was just a different lifestyle. And now we both go back and forth a lot. I work more on the main campus now. My husband directs the lab out here. So the whole reason, and my research program at USC is all about microbes and extreme environments. And I threw the tardigrade in here because remember what Brett just said, where you want to give back to your institution? The way I could give back was to find some really great Maryville College students in a couple different summers and bring them out to Catalina for a summer. And so Nicole McNabb and Lauren Wilson both spent a summer on Catalina Island looking for the mighty tardigrade. And they actually found a brand new species on Catalina Island, which we still have to do a little more work before we can submit that paper. But they had the boldness to say, hey, I can live anywhere for a summer, including an island. And they flew across, these were in different summers, so they flew across the country and just decided I can do this for a summer. And Nicole is in a grad program now, and Lauren I've actually lost track of. I just didn't have time before we came. But, great experience for both, and for me too. The other thing is, there's a lot of microbial ecologists out there, and I needed to figure out how can I make myself stand out among all these microbial ecologists. So I started focusing on extreme organisms. And one of the biggest extreme organisms, one was the tardigrade, because who knows what a tardigrade is? What's special about those organisms? You guys have a lot of them here in the Smokies. These guys can be shot up into outer space, exposed to space, brought back down, and they're still viable. So they have incredible resistance to UV radiation. They have incredible resistance to desiccation. So if you're going to study an animal and you want to know What are the limits of life? A tardigrade's a pretty good animal to start with. But another extreme environment is the deep sea. What's extreme about the deep sea? And I'm talking like 2 miles down. What's extreme about it?
Lack of sunlight.
Lack of sunlight. It's dark. There is no light. Well, there's just a little bit of like biologically created light, but nothing else. What else?
Massive pressure.
Massive pressure, like unbelievable pressure, and really, really cold, like 4 degrees C, like really cold. So those three things, the big one is the lack of light. It's a whole different light. So it's like light without any sunlight. No, or life, a whole chain of life with zero sunlight as the energy source. So we started studying the microbes at these chimneys, and you have to remember, this is an active volcano, kind of. So it's like boiling water, and about this far away, freezing water. So if you're an animal, you have to be able to withstand really strong changes in temperature. There's not so many animals down there. We were studying the microbes, the bacteria and the archaea primarily at that time. So from there, it wasn't that far of a reach to do the next extreme environment, which was not deep sea, but the deep south. By the deep south, I mean Antarctica. So again, cold, really cold, dark, 9 months a year, and just extreme in many ways. What I want to do is take the next like 10 slides and tell you a little bit about Antarctica, because my guess is that not many of you have had an opportunity to hear much about Antarctica sitting here in the middle of the U.S. I always put this picture up because whatever you choose to study down the road, you want something called the mom factor. Anyone know what the mom factor is? So when you show them pictures, they're like, oh, that looks so amazing. So what I was really studying, see that hint of green right there? I was actually studying the algae that was entrained in the bottom of the ice pack. But usually when I talk about that, people's eyes glaze over pretty quick. So I was like, oh, Mom, I was just studying penguins. They're awesome. And it worked better that way. But I am going to, so extreme-wise, there's 2 polar zones on our planet. One is the Arctic, and one is the Antarctic. So the Arctic is up, right? Antarctic is down. They're both dark, 9 months a year. They're both cold, but they're very different. So the Arctic isn't as cold as Antarctic. And if you look at winter temperatures, the average winter temperature is only -15 in the Arctic. That's almost doable. You guys sometimes get close to that maybe here. I don't know. But in Antarctica, the average winter temperature is -76. So it's cold. And then the summer temperatures above freezing in the Arctic, below freezing in the Antarctic, even in the summertime. The main difference is, if you look at these 2 pictures, the Arctic is an ocean surrounded by land, right? And the Antarctic is a continent surrounded by an ocean. And so right there, let's see if I have, yeah. So what you actually have warm water kind of going into the Arctic. And as we've heard in the last couple of years, we've actually had ice-free summers in the Arctic, which is unheard of. And that's due to everything that you hear about in many of your classes. The planet is changing, ecosystems are responding. The Antarctica is a much different system because you have the Antarctic circumpolar current, and that acts as this isolating barrier. So if you're an animal on the continent, you're kind of stuck there for the most part. And so the diversity is really, really low. And animals have been stuck there for so long that they've changed. They're a different type of animal than you might find other places. But here you've got terrestrial systems all the way around the Arctic, so animals can mingle and food webs are more complex. So I wanted to stay here because it's a simpler system. But for both regions, so you're kind of in class mode right now, but both regions, the communities are organized by the growth and decline of ice each year. And so that's kind of what's going to govern the physiology of organisms and and the reproduction and things like that. Okay, so the other thing is, even in Antarctica, like it changes. In the wintertime, you get a massive ice shelf that like doubles the continent, and in the summer, less ice. Okay, Super Bowl commercial. Back in 1986, when I was here at Maryville College, what's wrong with this commercial? What do you think? In one Super Bowl commercial, Coca-Cola changed an entire attitude of knowledge about polar systems. Polar bears and penguins never cross because penguins are south, polar bears are north. But in this, it messed up a bunch of kids for a long time, including me. So all of those things were science. As I've gotten older, I've had an opportunity to move into more administrative roles. And I took kind of a midlife crisis away from USC to go to the National Science Foundation. Any of the faculty in this room could do the same thing I did. It's literally like a sabbatical at NSF. Became a program officer, and actually, because of my Antarctic experience, ended up as the chief scientist for the U.S. program in Antarctica. And I got to go down there about 4 times. This was the time when I realized, and this is a message I have for you. First of all, how many of you are biology majors? Okay, how many are chemistry majors? Computer science? Okay, what other majors here are there? Biochemistry. Biochemistry, what else? Environmental science, great. So what I learned in this role more than anything else is, man, there's a lot of positions that have to do with science. You don't have to be a bench scientist to be a scientist, or you don't have to be only a computer scientist to be a scientist. And so what I was able to see is every field that you can think of here in Tennessee, in Knoxville, in Atlanta, or wherever, working down there. And I want to give you some examples of that. So I want you to kind of let your mind get a little bit broader. First of all, is the classic ecological position. As an oceanographer, I go to sea all the time on ships. And so going to sea, you do ecology, you do things. But other types of things, and the quality of this slide isn't awesome. So let me just go around as a geoscientist. So I'm somebody who studies planetary or Earth systems. There's policy. You can be a science writer. Anyone in here feel that they're an okay writer? I mean, we need science writers now more than ever. We need people who can convey things that are non-biased and thoughtful and things like that. So writing, you can be a science teacher, you can be in medicine. We have a lot of doctors that go down to Antarctica for a variety of things. And then the classic scientist is kind of this wedge. You can be an artist. You can inspire the next generation about things they need to be thinking about through art. And of course, engineering, you can be a lawyer, business, and so never let yourself think, okay, I'm a scientist, I need to find some niche thing without thinking there's all kinds of things you can do. The reason I bring this up is that the Antarctic, in terms of policy, it's the last place on Earth that is not owned by anyone. The Antarctic isn't owned by the United States or China or Russia. It's governed by the 13 flags here in the center and influenced by all these other flags. All of these dots, which you can't see really well, are bases owned by or operated by different countries. And so the countries that have a presence on the continent are represented by these flags. So you can imagine every decision down there is made by committee. So when we talk about, okay, how many fish do we harvest? How many shrimp or krill do we harvest? Do we allow military vehicles or vessels on the continent? The answer is no. It's one of the few places in the world where the military is not present, except for getting people in and out. The other thing, you can't see underneath, there's like a little US picture here. Antarctica is big, and it has all these ice sheets. The reason it's so cold you know, I told you it's a continent surrounded by water, right? So it's definitely isolated, but, whoops. Check this out. It is a continent. This red here, these are mountains. So imagine like this is a mountain range. This is a 2-mile high ice cap. So the reason it's so cold is ice is so high, it's putting you way up there in the atmosphere. And in fact, when you go to the South Pole, the U.S. runs the station at the South Pole, you actually take altitude medication for the first couple days you're there, or you'll get altitude sickness. But there's just a little tiny plane here. I can't quite explain the scale of the ice and the snow here. It's just absolutely massive. The U.S. bases, there are 3. McMurdo Station, which is the largest research base on the continent, the South Pole Station, and then a little tiny station at Palmer, which is like just south of South America. That's McMurdo. It literally looks like a little tiny city. South Pole Station here, and the South Pole has a lot of the telescopes because you're up high, there's very little moisture in the atmosphere, so you can see deep, deep space. So there's lots, you can be a really cool astronomer. Always get astronomer and astrologer mixed up, never do that. Anyway, so you can be an astronomer at South Pole, and then Palmer Station's like a little tiny lab, research lab. Very heavy on ecology here. Everything is different there. Check out the tires on all the vehicles. All the vehicles have to be plugged in, just like if, I suppose, if you lived in Minnesota or something like that. But everything is ice. These planes are actually landing on an ice sheet over a bay. So they can only land during the shoulder seasons of spring and fall, because in the winter it's too cold and dark. And in the summer, it's too sloppy and the planes would go through the ice. So you come in on these big U.S. Air Force planes that, like, this is a truck full of gas. And it loads up, you know, into the back of the plane, and that's how you get stuff like that onto the continent. Or you can get there by ship. So this is the ice sheet, and you see this is an icebreaker path, and here's the lab right here, and there's the ship. I'm not going to play this video, but you can go on YouTube and see some pretty cool videos. Okay. The other thing, so I want to talk about just a little bit of the ecology there because it's cool. So as kind of an ecologist, this is my jam. But things like whales, you know, the baleen whales, the kind of whales that their throats can expand, the largest mammal on the planet exists solely on shrimp, krill, about this big. And so they find big patches of krill, they shoot up, they expand their entire, like, mouth, or whatever that's called, and then they push all the water out and swallow the krill. So it's a really simple, direct food chain there. What's really cool, let's say that you are a cool satellite scientist. You can see krill from space using satellite technology. And sure enough, the whalers, the illegal whaling fleets that spend time in Antarctica do the same thing the whales do. They seek out these krill, these meatballs of krill. And while the quality here you can't see, but you can kind of see a dark pink in these areas. Where you find these dark pink areas, you also find whales. So using satellite technology, you can actually predict where you're going to find whales. Do they still advertise or show Whale Wars? Have you guys ever seen that sitcom? My gosh, that's terrible.
Reality.
It's just a show about this kind of Greenpeace-like ships that go down and try to stop the whaling in Antarctica. All right, the other thing, as an ecologist, so I can study one thing, I can study whales, not me personally, but somebody could study whales or penguins, or you could look at a community population ecology approach, where every year, 2 of the penguin species, the Adelies and the emperors, have to use Antarctica to breed. So they come up onto land, and they walk for a really long ways, they make nests, they breed. And then the penguins take turns going out to catch krill, to come back and barf it into their young. And so you can see that the barf here is pink, right? I know it's a little dark or on the slide, but krill is the most efficient thing, the same thing the whales are feeding on. But then at some point, the penguins stop feeding on krill and start feeding on silverfish. And so their bark changes to silver. And you can see one eating a fish here. Well, from an ecology point of view, that's super interesting. There's something called prey switching. And what happens is that when the whales come in, here's one of the minkies, and they start coming in November. Remember, the seasons are flipped down there from what they are here. They are there in the summertime, in December and January, at really high levels. At those 2 months, the penguins can't compete with the whales for the krill, and they switch to fish diets. It's not as good for their young, but it's a classic ecology thing where ecosystems, populations interact with each other, and they behave differently. Other thing, here's a really cool thing for those of you who might be interested in more of the biomedical aspects. The fish in Antarctica, many of them don't have red. They have antifreeze in their systems to keep from freezing, and they don't have hemoglobin at all. So what color is your blood? If I cut somebody, if I cut myself, what color would your blood be? Red. These fish have no red. They have instead other proteins, but they don't have hemoglobin. And part of that is, if you're a physical oceanographer, you understand that Antarctic water is super cold, holds a lot of oxygen. The fish are able to just absorb the oxygen into their gills directly without hemoglobin. But imagine fish like this are giving insight into like organ transplants and how we transport organs, how we can freeze organs and thaw them. Right now we can't do that yet, but if we could understand this, we maybe would have a better shot at it. So there's a lot of people studying the Antarctic fish, the ice fish down there. Then there's also like lots of predation going on. There's tons of whales in Antarctica, and there's actually different types of whales. So the killer whales, or the orcas, there's two types. One, they're there all year round, and the others that come down from South America and Africa and spend the summers in Antarctica. Ironically, they look similar. They look almost the same, but they're very different. The ones that are resident tend to prefer fish, while the ones that migrate in tend to hunt seals. And they hunt in packs, almost like wolves, where we actually watched a very similar thing, where a seal jumped up on ice to get away from the whales. The whales coordinated around the outside of the ice pack, and then there were two over here, and the two ran up, went up onto the ice pack, which made it start to do this, flipped the seal in, the other two got the seal, and then they all shared the kill. So they're hunting in very specific ways. The ecology is a whole lot of fun to think about, okay, how did that happen? How did they learn to do that? There are other predators down there, not a lot though. The leopard seals. This is a super famous picture by a National Geographic artist. You don't really want to dive with those, but a lot of people do, because they will also attack people as well. But these are, these leopard seals wait here because the penguins have to return every day to go back and get food for their young. The other thing, this is the southernmost seal on the planet. It's the seal that can stand the coldest temperatures. It's called the Weddell seal. And the adults are fine because they have this blubber. This blubber is super insulative. It allows them to stay warm. When the babies are born, they have no blubber at all. They just have a little bit of fur. So they start drinking milk immediately to try to put on fat. Human milk is like 2 to 4% fat. Seal milk is 70% fat. And so they have to gain weight really, really quick. You can see this one has no blubber at all. It's just fur. And they have to gain weight really, really quick because as winter breaks in, they'll leave the continent and go into the water. And that's just drama. That's my favorite picture ever because it just shows drama. They're super loud and yeah. Okay, so penguins also have adaptations. Remember, in a place like that, the eggs would freeze immediately. So how many people here saw Happy Feet or any of those penguin movies? And reproduction is what it's all about. Both males and females actually have an egg pouch right there. And they keep the egg directly against their skin, and then they have to keep turning it with their feet to keep it from freezing. So it's a really cool thing. When the parents come in to switch, they actually transfer the egg really carefully from one set of feet to the other. And if it falls off the feet, then the egg's going to freeze and it's not going to make it. So really highly adapted organisms, also super adapted feathers. They have the most dense feathers of any bird on the planet, and it's a really fine feather, so it really keeps them warm. And then finally, here's a cool ecological thing. Penguins often lay eggs, but lay them about a week apart. Why would they do that? Why not just lay the 2 eggs together? What do they need to survive more than anything else? They need really healthy krill populations. What if the timing is off? What if the planet is changing and the krill don't come in at the right time? So what would happen is perhaps the first chick would die, but then they have another egg that hatches a week later, providing an opportunity for better survival of the chicks. This one will probably die now because the first one happened to meet up with the right food timing, and they usually can't quite pull off raising 2 chicks at the same time. It's harsh. But remember I said that you can be any kind of scientist down there. For the engineers, as it turns out, penguins are not bright animals. And so you can take a robot penguin right here and embed it within the penguins, and they're like, hey, welcome. And then, they have cameras. But if you're a polar engineer, what do you do about batteries in super cold? So you have to think about that. Maybe the batteries are surrounded in some kind of heating pad, which is then run by another set of batteries. It's a really complex thing. The other thing is we now actually can put trackers on animals that can get to places that boats can't get to. And so that helps us understand the ecology of Antarctica. These are just 2 different types of seals, elephant seals and crab-eater seals. And the crab-eaters are green dots, the elephants are red dots. And what you can see is as the ice retreats, the elephant seals can find another habitat, but the crab-eater seals don't. What does that mean if we lose the ice pack in Antarctica? Which seal is going to survive? Yeah, the elephant seals have an ability to live in different habitats where the crab-eater seal has never had to face a situation where there wasn't an ice pack down there. So I'm almost done. I put this slide up here because, first of all, generally graduate students do all the work. So you're out there counting penguins every day, all day for an entire summer. Or you can team up with the Toyota scientists who are doing self-driving car technologies and use that same technology in drones to put swarms of drones that go over the penguin colony and count the penguins for you. They count the nests, they can tell how many eggs are in the nests, and they can do it in a fraction of the time with better accuracy than a graduate student standing on a rock with a clipboard. So if you're an engineer, you can work in Antarctica. Also, this is, they can also fence these penguins up. This is really cool. They can fence them up and corral them so that when they go to sea, they have to go through this bridge here. They step on this, they go under the bridge, and then they go out to sea. This bridge is a scale, and they're chipped just like your dog or cat at home, so they know which penguin goes through. When it comes back, it has to go over the same weighbridge, so they know how much food it took, how much food it ate while it was diving. And here's the dive patterns, because they also have little tags on them. So, I mean, really cool stuff. We're finally learning some of the ecology of very hard things to study. So I'm going to leave with that, and I'm going to switch to, for the last just few minutes before, what time do you guys have to leave? At 1:20?
1:25.
Okay. What I want to do is talk about how you can take this Maryville College experience and be sure you're successful when you leave here. The biggest thing that I would say, more than anything else, well, graduate, that would be the first step, that would be important. But seek out mentors in every step of the way. And what's a mentor? What's a mentor do for you? What do you think? Anybody? Well, they can be assigned by your boss to make sure that you do your job, or there's somebody that you seek out because you value what they might be able to say. So mentoring or being mentored is so important at every stage of your career. I have mentors that I use all the time in my position. So you can do the traditional top-down mentoring. You can do a couple different mentoring type things. A team could be your mentor. Maybe it's others. Maybe you guys are freshmen and sophomores, and there are some juniors and seniors that could be good near peer mentors. But it's not a passive process. Don't wait for it to happen. Don't wait for somebody to assign a mentor to you. Be very proactive, because a mentor is going to help you advance faster than any way that you could advance alone. Then the value of networking. How many people here have social media accounts? What kind do you have? Instagram, what else? What'd you say? Twitter. Oh yeah, Twitter, yep. Okay, I know I didn't expect Facebook, because every time I bring that up, my kids say, Mom, you're old, don't bring that up anymore. That's okay, I've accepted it. At your stage in the career, especially if you're a senior, you need to start thinking about something like LinkedIn, which is a professional site. And so you're not going to be sharing your little social feed on LinkedIn. You're going to be sharing more professional stuff, because when I hire, after I get the resumes in my hands, the first place I go is social media. What does that tell you about the type of things you should be posting on social media? I mean, definitely professional, definitely fun. Be mindful about things that you wouldn't necessarily want your future boss judging you on. And we try not to judge, we really do. But if I'm looking at two profiles and one comes across as really strong and professional, just almost like in my mind, it's like, well, maybe that would be a good member for our team, versus somebody who everywhere I see on social media is like passed out with a bunch of beer bottles around them. I don't know how to explain that, because we've all done that, maybe. But you just want to be careful about what your public presence is. So social networking used for recruiting, LinkedIn, again, Facebook, sorry about that, Twitter, and then Google Drive. And there's some new ones coming out. There's one called Blue something. Yeah, so just be mindful, change with the times, be professional in what you're doing, because now you've had fun, you're going to have a whole lot more fun the rest of your life, but get the job. So, think about it. The other thing is, use the internet for finding different opportunities you'd never thought of before. So find a good jobs board in whatever field you're in and use it. That's what mentors can do too, is they can help you find jobs. No matter what job you get. When I left here, my first job was at kinder care. I was a daycare provider. But the person who I had as a boss wrote me a really good letter of recommendation. It doesn't matter what your job is when you get out of here, but when you leave that job, think to yourself, would that person write me a stellar, not a good, but a stellar letter of recommendation to help me land in the next step? So, always be thinking about putting yourself out there when you're working, trying to think, okay, I could volunteer for that. I mean, I may not be the best person, but I just want to make a good impression. And I think that's about, and also, yeah, cover letters. Any job you apply for, don't just send a resume. Put a cover letter on it that actually talks about what you would bring to the job and what the job would bring to you. In this day of ChatGPT, most of you will have your resumes scanned by probably AI. So make sure you've hit all the things in the job ad that they're asking for, so you make that first cut before a set of human eyes sees your resume. And also your near peer mentor or your mentor can look over your letter and make suggestions. Anytime somebody gives you suggestions, even if they're harsh. Like, how many people, well, you've got faculty in the room, so don't really answer this, but how many people here have turned in an essay and it was just slaughtered and you were demoralized when it came back? Here's what I want you to do, is think of that as a gift, because if they didn't care, they'd put a check mark on it and say C or C minus. They took the time to write something. It's a gift, even if it kind of hurt. You thought it was the best essay you'd ever written, and then it didn't turn out so awesome. It's okay, it was a gift because they're trying to make you a better writer. And that's it. I think that's it. So with the few minutes that we have left, I'd be happy to answer any questions. It was kind of a random talk today, but you know, you guys are doing a liberal arts education, which is kind of a random education with a really centered focus. So you're already taking that, like, okay, I'm going to try these extra things. And yeah, so that's it. Thank you. Thank you.
What questions do we have for Dr. Heidelberg? There's a whole lot of experience in different types of positions to pull on and draw on here.
Yeah.
When you have medical personnel down there, are they usually joint MD PhD, or are they usually PhD with a research focus and like immunology?
Yeah. So her question, for those of you couldn't hear, if we have medical doctors down there, what are they doing? Well, we have a whole hospital situation down there, or there's some type of medical doctor at every research station, because with ice, there's always broken bones or falls or whatever. And also people go kind of crazy down there a bit. So we definitely have the traditional doctor, but the guy, I didn't show one picture, which was a penguin completely outfitted in like stuff. And he was a respiratoriologist. He studied breathing in people, and he like did all the anesthesia and surgeries, and he used all of his money from being an anesthesiologist to go to Antarctica and study diving behavior in penguins, because they can go down and stay a really long time. So what does that mean for oxygen transfer and how they're handling it? Other types of medical people, we always embed vets with all the SEAL teams, because SEALs are all protected mammals, and you have to have a vet if you're doing anything like sedating them or even disturbing them. There has to be a vet there so you don't do something wrong. So to answer your question, medical people are in every field down there: physiology, medical science. We have the Army sends medical people down to look at people's behavior, and yeah, and also again, lots of accidents just because it's an extreme kind of harsh environment, cold. Any other questions? Thank you all for coming. I know this is probably coming up close to midterm time or first exam time perhaps. So thank you for giving me time.
Especially because some of you have a genetics lab.
Oh no!
So for all of you that were here, we really appreciate it. Maybe you could speak a minute on when you get into a graduate program for the first time, because I know there's a lot of seniors in here.
Yeah.
What are your first steps when you get into that graduate program? How should you start to situate yourself, and then what would you recommend?
Right, so it depends on the grad program. Some have fairly heavy course loads, and some throw you right into research. The best thing for a grad student is join the graduate student like circles or whatever, and make sure that you've got somebody helping you navigate things that very busy faculty don't pay attention to. Like make sure you're taking the right courses in the right order. You'll get help, but also, how many people, be honest, how many people here read primary literature? Like in a class? Because in grad school, you move away from textbooks and you're moving to primary literature no matter what your field is. So you have to learn how to read a paper. And now I can take a paper, a PDF paper, load it into ChatGPT and say, type in the command, in 2 paragraphs, summarize this paper for me. And it will give me a summary. So 2 things about that. One, if you don't read it, you're not really understanding what they're doing and what the weaknesses or strengths of the research are. The second is AI right now does not have the capability to correctly do citations, and there's a lot of errors that come out of it. And you want to be really careful that as a grad student, you're there because you want to become a scientist that independently thinks and advances science forward. You're going to stop doing what you do in undergrad, which is let everyone else summarize stuff for you, and you're going to really try to become the next leader. So that's the main difference, and you don't get that until you're about the second year into grad school. I don't. You guys have both been in grad school thing. Is that what you would think?
Yeah, that sounds great. Like, I agree for sure.
And you're put on the spot a lot. Like in your lab groups, every month you might be asked to do a talk to your lab group defending your choices in however you're designing your experiments or writing the beginnings of your dissertation. So you just have to be bold enough to put yourself out there and be wrong and take those gifts of criticism or suggestions and say, oh, I hadn't thought of that. All right, I got this. I'm going to incorporate that and move on. How many people in here are seniors right now? Okay, it's spring. Stay focused. Oh, that's exciting.
What other questions do we have?
So I ask you this, somebody who writes letters for students. As somebody who's evaluating those students and thinking about what sets them apart, are there particular experiences or things you're looking for from a student that help you make that decision?
Yes. Letters are so important because everybody can study really hard in a dorm room alone and end up with an A or a B or whatever. What I'm looking for in letters is one, a letter writer who knows the student. So when I was here, this scientist, Dr. Ramser was here, and he was working with the EPA to look at Alcoa effluent. I took this job because I needed money, and I would go in every night and count how many little tiny zooplankton lived in different concentrations of effluent, Alcoa effluent. In the end, I didn't even realize it, but having that internship helped my letters be more personal. One, I want to see you've done something besides book work. I want to see that you've gotten outside the classroom and you've done something. I also, personally, would like to see people who give back to the community through some type of service, because they're giving back, they're engaging in their community, they're not just using their community. So I know Maryville College has a big thing about service, but if you're in clubs, the STEM group, is there any type of officers or committees or anything like that? You want to be able to show leadership experience, even if it's outside of science. You want the rich letter. I see so many letters saying, you know what, this student was in my 300-person introduction to biology, and I looked up their grade, and they got an A, so they must have done really well. Okay, that tells me nothing about how this person might be in my lab. And so you want to have a letter that describes you a little bit more and talks about, even if it talks about like, oh man, this student really struggled, but they persisted and they were successful and they presented at some conference. So you want to see that trajectory. What's your story? And you want that to come out. You want that to come out in your cover letter, and you want it to be backed up in different ways by your letters of rec. Those are more important than your grades almost. Yeah. So those of you who are faculty in here, I don't know what you're looking for when you get a letter of rec or when you're writing letters, but those little additives really make a huge difference.
For sure.
Yeah.
Do you have time for maybe one question?
Yeah.
I was wondering, I know you said you did a lot of work with like microbial ecology, which microbes and stuff obviously, and like a lot of your pictures are like of these landscapes and stuff. So what's kind of like
The happy medium?
Yeah, what's like the mix between you like out in the field collecting these things and then bringing them back to the lab to look at?
Yeah, to get into grad school, you pretty much want to try to be able to say something you're interested in instead of saying I'm interested in everything. I just gave you a talk that was like a smorgasbord of stuff, and I was actually using other people's experiences like they were my own. They weren't. But you want to be able to set yourself up as an oceanographer. I could study anything I want in the ocean, but when I applied to grad school, I really wanted to study corals. And I didn't, and not from a kumbaya point of view, not because, oh my God, coral reef, I love corals, not from that point of view. I really wanted to understand how corals, a really productive system, could live in nutrient water, overlying water, that if I stuck a nutrient meter into, I wouldn't even get a registered nitrogen or a phosphorus signal. How can that be? You could have almost like rainforest production with no nutrients in the water above. So I didn't know what I was talking about at all, but I was able to start to articulate what I was really interested in. And I also paired it with the people that I was applying to work in their labs. You also, if some of you want to go into grad school, you want to actually reach out to faculty before you apply to the school. Ask if they're taking students. Look at their web presence and see if what they're doing is of interest to you, and then try to tailor your letter. Some of you may choose not to go to grad school. That's great. The same applies for letters of rec and your cover letter. Write to the job that you want or that you think you want. Don't just send a generic, yeah, I want to work in healthcare. Well, right. Why? What's your story? You know, give the person reading your app something that they're like, oh, this person sounds really interesting. Maybe I'll interview them. Yeah, so you don't be a jack of all trades in your letter, because you won't catch their attention, and write to the person that you're trying to get into their lab, whatever they're studying. Maybe they're doing harmful algal blooms, which I think we have a lot of in Tennessee as well, where all of a sudden for not random, but certain times a year, we'll get these big toxic algal blooms in the lakes, and that's bad. So write to that. I want to know why. I'm really interested. And as an undergrad, I used to volunteer with this group, and we would go out and sample water and look at water quality, something like that. So start thinking about what interests you and try to build experience in that area. You will have lots of opportunities here if you seek them out. They're not just going to land on your lap. And then the RE, I didn't know about summer REUs, but the National Science Foundation, NOAA, NASA, DOE, all of the federal agencies run summer programs that will allow you to do summer research or experiential learning. This summer is going to be tough because there's a lot of crazy stuff going on where they're going to eliminate a lot of workforce development stuff until the dust settles, and then it will come back up. But you're going to have to work maybe a little harder to find something that's paid. If you can avoid it, don't do volunteer work. You guys, you're worth more than that if you can find it. Try to get something that's paid if you can. But, yeah.
And can I just echo what you're saying and remind you all, you get a weekly email from Brett, and in that email, there's always an attachment that has a list of all of the opportunities that we know about, REUs, all those things, and as well as local jobs that are hiring for STEM folks. And so open that, interact with that. A lot of those deadlines are coming up for the ones that are still going to be
Mid-February.
So engage with those emails, make it a habit every week, look at it, find things to do.
You know, if you're interested in animals, working in a vet, it sounds awful, but cleaning cages, whatever, you're in a vet, you're looking at the job. It's not very fun work, but it's a great entry-level job that shows you're trying to break into the field.
Let's thank our speaker one more time.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
I'm going to add one quick thing to what Dr. Gibson said, which is when we ask for people to